The coffee splashed across Vivian Lewis's white blouse like modern art, a startling explosion of brown against pristine fabric that drew gasps from nearby patrons at the upscale Manhattan cafe. She looked up, stunned, into the most apologetic pair of blue eyes she'd ever seen. "I am so incredibly sorry," the man said, his voice deep with genuine remorse as he frantically grabbed napkins from a nearby dispenser. "Please, let me pay for the cleaning. Your blouse is ruined." Vivian, still processing the hot liquid seeping through to her skin, took a deep breath. Her morning presentation to the board of directors at the Children's Hospital, where she worked as head of pediatric nursing, was in exactly 47 minutes, and her carefully prepared appearance was now thoroughly compromised. "It's fine," she said automatically, though it clearly wasn't. She accepted the napkins he thrust toward her and dabbed ineffectively at the spreading stain. "It's absolutely not fine," the man insisted, his brow furrowed with concern. "I wasn't looking where I was going, I was on my phone when I should have been paying attention." Something about his honest admission and genuine distress melted Vivian's initial annoyance. In a city where people regularly bumped into each other without so much as a backward glance, his sincerity was refreshing. "Really, it happens," she offered, glancing at her watch. "But I do have an important meeting, and I'm not sure how I'm going to make it work now." The man, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in what she could tell even with her limited fashion knowledge was an extraordinarily expensive suit, suddenly brightened. "There's a Neiman Marcus 2 blocks from here. Please let me buy you a replacement, it's the least I can do." Vivian laughed, the sound tinged with disbelief. "That's very generous, but I don't have time to shop. I have to be at Presbyterian in less than an hour." 30 minutes, he promised, already signaling to the barista to remake whatever Vivian had ordered. "I'm Ryan, by the way, Ryan Patterson." "Vivian Lewis," she replied, still dabbing at her blouse, "and there's no way I can find something suitable in 30 minutes. Ryan smiled, a confident curve of his lips that suggested he was unused to hearing the word no. "Trust me," he said, and something in his assured manner made Vivian consider his offer. Her alternative was showing up to her career-defining presentation looking like she'd wrestled with a coffee pot and lost. 25 minutes, she countered, checking her watch again. 23 minutes later, Vivian was staring at herself in a dressing room mirror at Neiman Marcus, wearing a silk blouse that cost more than her monthly car payment. Ryan had somehow arranged for a personal shopper to be waiting for them when they arrived, with a selection of white blouses already pulled in her size. "This is insane," she called through the dressing room door. "Is it the right size?" Ryan asked from outside. Vivian turned in the mirror. The blouse was perfect, simple enough for her professional needs, but with elegant details that elevated it far beyond what she would normally wear. "It fits," she admitted, "but I can't accept this, it's too much." "Please do," Ryan said. "I've caused you enough stress this morning, let me fix it." Vivian emerged from the dressing room, her stained blouse now in a shopping bag. "Thank you. This is incredibly generous." Ryan's eyes widened slightly as he took in her appearance, and Vivian felt an unexpected flutter in her stomach at his appreciative gaze. "It suits you perfectly," he said, then glanced at his watch, a timepiece Vivian suspected cost as much as a small car. "You have 18 minutes to make your meeting. My driver is waiting outside to take you wherever you need to go." "Your driver?" Vivian echoed faintly. Ryan smiled. "You didn't think I was going to make you late after all this, did you?" 10 minutes later, Vivian was stepping out of a sleek black Bentley in front of Presbyterian Hospital, clutching her presentation materials and still processing the whirlwind of the past hour. "Thank you," she said to the driver, who nodded professionally. "Mr. Patterson asked me to give you this," the man said, handing her a small business card. Vivian accepted it, turning it over in her hands. It was heavy stock, minimal text, just Ryan's name, a phone number, and the words Patterson Global Enterprises, CEO, embossed in subtle silver lettering. She tucked the card into her pocket, squared her shoulders, and headed into the hospital. The mysterious, generous Ryan Patterson would have to wait. She had a presentation to nail, and nail it she did. The board unanimously approved her proposal for an expanded pediatric oncology wing, complete with the innovative family-centered care model she'd been advocating for years. As the meeting concluded with handshakes and congratulations, Vivian felt the weight of the business card in her pocket. Back in her office, she turned the card over in her fingers, debating. There was something compelling about Ryan beyond his obvious good looks and generosity. He had a presence, a certain magnetism that drew her in. But she was also aware that men like him, wealthy, powerful CEOs, likely had women falling at their feet daily. With a decisive motion, she picked up her phone and dialed the number. Patterson, his voice answered after 2 rings. "It's Vivian Lewis, from this morning's coffee disaster." There was a pause and then what sounded like genuine pleasure in his voice. "The blouse emergency. How was your presentation?" "They approved it," she said, unable to keep the pride from her voice. "Every aspect." "Congratulations," Ryan said warmly. "That calls for a celebration. Dinner tonight?" Vivian hesitated. "I don't even know you." "That's generally the purpose of dinner, to get to know someone," she laughed despite herself. "Fair point. But I should tell you, I'm not in the habit of going out with strange men who spill coffee on me." "Does that happen often enough to be a habit?" "Touché," she conceded. "But still, I promise excellent food, interesting conversation, and absolutely no pressure," Ryan interrupted smoothly. "Just a proper thank you for being so gracious about my clumsiness this morning." Vivian considered the offer. Her dating life had been practically non-existent since taking on the head nursing position 3 years ago. The idea of an evening out, especially with someone as intriguing as Ryan, was tempting. "All right," she agreed finally. "Dinner sounds nice." "Excellent, I'll send a car for you at 7. After hanging up, Vivian sat back in her chair, feeling a mix of excitement and trepidation. She'd just agreed to have dinner with a man she knew nothing about, except that he was wealthy enough to buy expensive blouses on a whim and had the kind of confidence that came with significant success. What she didn't know was that across town, Ryan Patterson was sitting in his penthouse office, staring at his phone with an uncharacteristic smile on his face. His assistant, who had worked with him for 8 years, couldn't remember the last time she'd seen that particular expression. "Margaret," Ryan called, not taking his eyes off his phone. "Cancel my dinner with the Japanese investors tonight. Something more important has come up." Margaret raised an eyebrow but made the note. In 8 years, Ryan Patterson had never canceled a business dinner for personal reasons. Whatever or whoever had prompted this change was already remarkable. At 6:58 p.m., Vivian was putting the finishing touches on her makeup when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Car is downstairs whenever you're ready. No rush." The consideration in those simple words, "no rush," struck her. Most people in positions of power expected others to accommodate their schedules, not the other way around. The car that awaited her wasn't the Bentley from that morning, but a more subtle luxury sedan. The driver opened the door with a polite nod. "Good evening, Miss Lewis. Mr. Patterson is already at the restaurant." The drive took them to a small, unassuming building in the West Village. There was no flashy sign, just a simple wooden door with a small brass plaque reading Mason. Inside, the restaurant was intimate, perhaps 15 tables, all beautifully set with crisp linens and fresh flowers. Ryan stood as she approached, and Vivian noticed several things at once. He was taller than she remembered, his suit was impeccably tailored to his athletic frame, and his smile seemed genuinely pleased to see her. "You look beautiful," he said, pulling out her chair. "Thank you for not mentioning that I'm not wearing coffee this time," she replied with a small smile. Ryan laughed, a warm sound that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "I was planning to be much more careful tonight. I've asked them to serve all beverages in sippy cups, just to be safe." Dinner was a revelation. The food was extraordinary, course after course of exquisite French cuisine served by unobtrusive staff, who seemed to anticipate their needs before they arose. But more surprising was the conversation. Ryan was articulate, informed, and genuinely interested in her work. "So the new wing will allow families to stay with pediatric cancer patients?" he asked, leaning forward with interest. Vivian nodded, warming to her favorite topic. "The research is clear children heal better when their support systems are present, but most hospitals aren't designed for that. We're creating private rooms with sleeping accommodations for parents, common areas for siblings, and integrated support services." "It sounds innovative," Ryan said. "And important." "It is," Vivian agreed, "though fundraising for the full vision is going to be challenging. The board approved the basic model, but some of the elements I most believe in are still contingent on additional funding." Ryan's eyes held hers for a moment. "Tell me more about those elements." As the evening progressed, Vivian found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in years. There was something about Ryan that invited confidence, a quiet attentiveness that made her feel truly heard. Only when the restaurant had emptied did Vivian realize how late it had grown. "I should probably go," she said reluctantly. "Early shift tomorrow." Ryan nodded, signaling for the check. "Of course. Thank you for joining me tonight, Vivian. I've enjoyed our conversation enormously." Outside, his car was waiting. "May I see you again?" he asked, standing close enough that she could smell his cologne, something subtle and expensive. Vivian looked up at him, surprised by how much she wanted to say yes. "I'd like that." The next few weeks passed in a blur of dinners, walks through the city, and conversations that stretched late into the night. Ryan was unlike anyone Vivian had dated before, not just because of his wealth, but because of the intensity with which he approached life. "You never told me exactly what Patterson Global Enterprises does," Vivian mentioned one evening as they strolled along the Hudson River after dinner. Ryan's hand tightened slightly around hers. "We're primarily in shipping and logistics. My grandfather started with a single cargo ship after World War II. My father expanded into international freight. I've diversified further into supply chain technology and specialized transport." "Sounds complicated," Vivian observed. Ryan shrugged. "It's essentially moving things from where they are to where they need to be, just on a global scale. And that makes you—" Vivian hesitated, not wanting to appear gauche by asking directly about his wealth. Ryan glanced at her, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Comfortable enough," Vivian laughed. "Right, comfortable enough to buy random strangers designer blouses and take over exclusive restaurants for dinner." "You were hardly random," Ryan countered, stopping to face her. "You were extraordinary from the moment we met." The sincerity in his voice caught Vivian off guard. In the soft evening light, with the city skyline glittering across the river, she felt herself falling for him in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. Ryan leaned down, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that started gently but deepened with a hunger that took her breath away. When they finally parted, Vivian felt dizzy with emotion. "I'm falling in love with you, Vivian Lewis," Ryan said quietly, his forehead resting against hers. "And it scares the hell out of me." "Why?" she whispered, her heart pounding. "Because I've never felt this way before, not even close." As their relationship deepened, Vivian began to understand the realities of dating one of New York's wealthiest men. There were paparazzi photos of them leaving restaurants, speculation in gossip columns, and curious glances from her colleagues at the hospital. "Does it bother you?" Ryan asked one evening, showing her a tabloid that had published photos of them at a charity gala the previous weekend. The headline read, "Shipping Magnate Patterson's New Love. Who is this mystery woman?" Vivian studied the photos with a critical eye. "They could have at least used one where I wasn't mid-sentence," she said with a laugh. "But no, it doesn't bother me." "Does it bother you that they're calling me a mystery woman instead of mentioning my actual job?" Ryan's expression grew serious. "What bothers me is that they're intruding on something private and meaningful, but I've lived with this most of my life." He hesitated. "I should have warned you about this aspect of being with me." Vivian set the tabloid aside and moved closer to him on the couch. "I'm a big girl, Ryan. I can handle a few nosy photographers if it means being with you." The real test came 3 months into their relationship when Ryan invited Vivian to accompany him to Hong Kong for a business trip. "It's a big step," Vivian acknowledged when he proposed the idea over dinner at his penthouse apartment. 10 days is a long time." "Too long to be apart," Ryan countered, taking her hand across the table. "I have meetings most days, but the evenings would be ours. And there's a weekend in the middle where we could go anywhere in the region you'd like." Vivian considered the offer. Her relationship with Ryan had become the center of her life in a way she hadn't anticipated. The thought of 10 days apart made her heart sink, but there were practical considerations. "I'd have to arrange coverage at the hospital," she said, thinking aloud, "and I've never been to Asia before." "Say yes," Ryan urged, his eyes intense. "I want to show you my world, Vivian." She did say yes, and 2 weeks later found herself stepping off Ryan's private jet into the humid Hong Kong air. The trip was a revelation not just of a new culture and city, but of seeing Ryan in his professional element. While he attended meetings, Vivian explored the city with a guide Ryan had arranged. In the evenings, he took her to dinners with business associates where she observed the respect, sometimes bordering on deference, that people showed him. "They're intimidated by you," she noted one night as they returned to their suite at the Peninsula Hotel. Ryan loosened his tie with a thoughtful expression. "Power intimidates people, especially when it's attached to money." "You don't intimidate me," Vivian said, stepping closer to help him with his tie. Ryan's hands covered hers. "That's one of the countless reasons I love you." The words, spoken so matter-of-factly, hung in the air between them. It wasn't the first time he'd said it, but something about this moment felt different, weighted with significance. "I love you too," Vivian replied, and the smile that spread across Ryan's face made her heart ache with happiness. The promised weekend getaway turned out to be a trip to a private island in the Philippines, accessible only by seaplane. As they approached from the air, Vivian gasped at the sight of white sand beaches surrounding a lush central forest, with a single elegant structure nestled among the trees. "Welcome to Isla Paraíso," Ryan said as they stepped onto the wooden dock. "My own little piece of paradise." The next 2 days were like something from a dream, swimming in crystal-clear waters, dining on fresh seafood prepared by a private chef, and making love in a bedroom open to the ocean breezes. On their final evening, as they walked along the beach at sunset, Ryan stopped suddenly. "I had planned to do this in New York," he said, his voice uncharacteristically nervous. "I had this whole elaborate scenario worked out, but being here with you now, I can't wait another day." Before Vivian could process his words, Ryan was down on one knee in the sand, pulling a small box from his pocket. "Vivian Lewis, you came into my life because of my own clumsiness, and it was the luckiest moment of my existence. These past months have shown me what I've been missing my entire life: someone who sees me, not my wealth or position. Someone who challenges me, supports me, and makes me happier than I ever thought possible." He opened the box to reveal a stunning diamond ring. "Will you marry me?" Tears filled Vivian's eyes as the setting sun cast golden light across Ryan's hopeful face. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, I'll marry you." Ryan slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, before standing to pull her into a passionate kiss. As they broke apart, both laughing and crying, Vivian looked down at the ring now adorning her hand. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "It was my grandmother's," Ryan explained. "The only woman my grandfather ever loved. He always said she married him when he had nothing but dreams." "I'm not marrying you for nothing," Vivian teased, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I'm marrying you for everything you are." Their engagement made headlines in business publications and gossip columns alike. The narrative was irresistible: the billionaire shipping magnate and the dedicated nurse. Some outlets painted it as a modern fairy tale, while others speculated more cynically about Vivian's motivations. Does it bother you?" Ryan asked one morning, finding Vivian frowning over an article that described her as a social climbing hospital worker. "What bothers me," she said, setting aside her tablet, "is that they don't mention anything about my actual work or achievements. As if the only interesting thing about me is that I'm marrying you." Ryan took her hand, running his thumb over the engagement ring. "I know who you are, Vivian, so do your colleagues and patients. The rest doesn't matter." But it did matter, in ways that became increasingly apparent as they began planning their life together. Ryan was accustomed to a level of wealth that still made Vivian uncomfortable. When he suggested buying a brownstone in the West Village, she balked at the 8-figure price tag. "It's an investment," Ryan argued, "and we need the space if we want a family someday." The mention of family, something they'd discussed only in abstract terms, shifted the conversation entirely. "Do you," Vivian asked quietly, "want a family?" Ryan's expression softened. "With you?" More than anything, the wedding planning brought more challenges. Ryan's mother, a formidable society matron, had definite ideas about how the nuptials should unfold. "The plaza has been the venue for Patterson weddings for 3 generations," Elizabeth Patterson informed Vivian during an awkward lunch. "And spring is really the only acceptable season for a society wedding." Vivian, who had been imagining something more intimate, nodded politely while exchanging a look with Ryan. Later, he apologized for his mother's presumptuousness. "This is our wedding," he assured her. "We'll have it wherever and whenever you want." They compromised with a ceremony at the plaza, keeping with tradition, but limited the guest list to 300 instead of the 1,000 Elizabeth had envisioned. Vivian insisted on a meaningful touch. The children from her hospital ward would serve as flower girls and ring bearers. As the wedding date approached, an unexpected challenge arose. The hospital announced budget cuts that threatened Vivian's expanded oncology wing project. Despite the board's earlier approval, funding for the family accommodation aspects, the parts Vivian considered most crucial, was being reduced. "It's devastating," she told Ryan one evening, curled against him on the couch in his apartment. "We've been working toward this for years. The children need their families with them during treatment." Ryan held her close, his chin resting on her head. "What's the shortfall?" "About 7 million, Vivian sighed. "We can still build the basic ward, but all the innovative elements will have to wait." The next morning, Vivian was called into an emergency board meeting. Confused and concerned, she hurried to the hospital's administrative floor, only to find the board members looking unusually pleased. "Miss Lewis," the chairman began, "we've received an anonymous donation specifically earmarked for your oncology wing project. The full $7 million needed to complete your vision, plus an additional $3 million for future expansion." Vivian's hand flew to her mouth. "Anonymous." The donor specifically requested no recognition, the chairman confirmed. "Just that the funds be used according to your original proposal." It didn't take detective skills for Vivian to identify the likely source of the donation. That evening, she confronted Ryan at his apartment. "Did you donate $10 million to my hospital project?" She demanded, her emotions a complicated mix of gratitude, love, and unease. Ryan didn't pretend ignorance. "I did." "Why anonymously, and why didn't you tell me?" Ryan approached her slowly, taking her hands in his. "I didn't want you to feel that I was interfering or trying to solve your problems with money. The work you're doing matters, Vivian. Those children and families deserve the care you've envisioned for them. The money means nothing to me compared to seeing your passion realized." Vivian's eyes filled with tears. "You should have told me." "Would you have accepted it if I had?" The question hung between them, honest and challenging. After a moment, Vivian shook her head. "Probably not, at least not without a fight." Ryan's lips curved into a small smile. "I know. Your independence is one of the things I love most about you. But sometimes, Vivian, it's okay to accept help, especially when it serves a greater purpose than either of us." As she looked up into his earnest face, Vivian felt the last of her reservations about their different worlds dissolving. Ryan's wealth was a fact of his life, just as her dedication to nursing was a fact of hers. What mattered was how they used what they had to make each other and the world better. "Thank you," she said finally, reaching up to touch his face. "Those children will have their families with them because of you." "Because of us," Ryan corrected, pulling her close. Their wedding day dawned bright and clear, a perfect New York spring day. As promised, the ceremony was held at the plaza, transformed into a garden of white roses and cherry blossoms. But despite the grandeur of the venue, the ceremony itself was deeply personal. Vivian walked down the aisle on her father's arm, past smiling guests and the beaming faces of children from her hospital ward. When she reached Ryan, standing tall and handsome in his tuxedo, the love shining in his eyes made her breath catch. They had written their own vows, and Ryan's voice was steady as he promised to love, honor, and support her for all his days. "You came into my life because I wasn't watching where I was going," he said, drawing laughs from the guests who knew their story. "But I'm convinced that even if I had been paying attention, the universe would have found another way to bring us together. You are my destiny, Vivian Lewis, and I will spend the rest of my life grateful for that spilled coffee." Vivian's vows, spoken through happy tears, acknowledged their different worlds and the bridge they had built between them. "I never expected to fall in love with a man who could buy a small country," she said, prompting more laughter. "But what I've found in you, Ryan, is something no amount of money could purchase. A partner who sees me fully, loves me completely, and inspires me daily. I promise to walk beside you through whatever life brings, to create a home filled with love, and to never let you forget that the best things in life aren't things at all." The reception that followed was everything Elizabeth Patterson had hoped for: elegant, lavish, and attended by New York's elite, but with touches that were uniquely Vivian and Ryan. In lieu of wedding favors, they made a donation to the pediatric oncology wing in honor of each guest. The children from the hospital performed a special song that left not a dry eye in the house. And when it came time for their first dance, the sophisticated crowd melted away as Ryan and Vivian moved together, lost in each other's eyes. "Happy, Mrs. Patterson." Ryan murmured against her ear as they swayed to the music. "Deliriously," Vivian answered, tipping her face up for his kiss. A year later, the Patterson Pediatric Family Center opened its doors at Presbyterian Hospital. The state-of-the-art facility featured everything Vivian had dreamed of: private family suites for young patients, play areas for siblings, counseling services, and even emergency housing for families traveling from out of state. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Vivian stood proudly beside Ryan, their hands intertwined. Her other hand rested on the gentle swell of her stomach, where their first child, a daughter, was growing. "This is your legacy," Ryan whispered as they watched the first families tour the new facility. Vivian shook her head, leaning against his strong shoulder. "No, it's ours. Everything good in my life is because a certain billionaire wasn't watching where he was going one morning." Ryan laughed, pulling her closer. "Best mistake I ever made." As they walked through the center, greeting staff and families, Vivian reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a coffee stain to a shared purpose, from strangers to soulmates. Life had a funny way of bringing people together, sometimes through the most unlikely circumstances. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, the person who bumped into you turned out to be the one you were meant to spend forever with.